Nothing symbolizes the Japanese at war as much as this weapon, the sword of the samurai.
It is the ultimate cutting weapon. It is designed to cut. It's a terrible weapon, and it will cut.
What the Colt 45 is to America, the samurai sword is to Japan, the stuff of national myth.
The Japanese sword is perfectly capable of cutting through iron plates or even other sword blades without becoming damaged.
But it is revered for more than just its pitiless beauty and deadly precision.
The sword was a weapon that represented the samurai himself. The great shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu referred to the sword as the soul of the samurai.
For this is the weapon that saved Japan from one of the most warlike empires in history, the Mongols. It seemed nothing could stop them, until in the Battle of Hakata Bay, they met the samurai armed with his sword. This was the sword that kept Japan Japanese. Before gunpowder, wars were fought with swords. But of all the thousands that have existed in history, only one remains as potent today as it did 1,000 years ago. The Japanese sword of the samurai. No other can rival it for beauty or cutting power.
For 1,000 years, swordsmen have agreed that where the cut is concerned, the best weapon is this, the Japanese sword. It has a curve to the blade, and this means that when you strike at your opponent, only one little bit of the curve reaches the target first, and then as you swing, the rest bites in, bites through, and cuts to the bone. On the Eastern Mediterranean, there were European crusaders who were fighting with a weapon like this. As you can see, it is straight-bladed, as most were, but this was basically a thrusting weapon. You actually pushed that and hoped that you pushed with enough strength to get the point into the chain mail, which was what the Europeans were used to facing when they were fighting each other. If you struck a blow with it, it's quite heavy, and although it had a sharp edge, the edge would probably not have cut much because, again, it doesn't have the curve to it. So the whole blade is landing at the same time. If you struck a blow with that, you stunned your opponent more than cut him.
But the Japanese sword has another claim to uniqueness. Sword blades can be either razor sharp or they can be resilient. The Japanese sword was both.
The whole blade itself is quite rigid. The edge is extremely hard, and one would expect it to be, in the Western sense, one would expect it therefore to be brittle. But the Japanese sword is composed of this very sophisticated laminate of a mixture of steel, so that a hard edge can be regained, which will not chip in combat.
All the other weapons of the time were purely offensive. You defended yourself not with the weapon, but with a shield, or you hoped that your helmet was strong enough and ducked. This blade always was heavy enough to knock aside an opponent's blade, to make what fencers call a beat, or indeed to make a parry. And that at the time made it unique.
With no shield to hide behind, the swordsman had to rely on reflexes and a repertoire of brilliantly executed parries and cuts. Brute strength on its own was useless. These exercises were practiced endlessly against an imaginary opponent. sword was the mark of a samurai. These warlords were the real power in medieval Japan, with the emperor a mere religious figurehead. The samurai's word was law, particularly on the question of swords. No one else could wear one, on pain of death.
The badge of the samurai, the mark of the samurai, was the possession of a sword and the right to wear one. So the person with the sword through his belt was a member of an elite. It was the symbol of his authority. It was the weapon with which he had been trained. It is the weapon with which he would defend his life and, if necessary, end it in another.
In the hands of a samurai, the sword had only one purpose: to kill rivals. Duels between samurai were governed by an elaborate etiquette.
日本軍はいわば小グループのあるいは個人戦なんですね。馬に乗った、集団がお互いに名乗り合って、自分の名前を名乗るわけですね。これはどこの誰かわからないような人間と、戦ってもしょうがないと、こういう考え方からで、まず自分の名前を名乗れば向こうも、それに対して相手も名前を名乗る。そして両方誰と誰か確認した上でですね、戦うという、非常に個人戦闘と。
The secret of the Japanese sword lies in the extraordinary way in which it is made. To this day, sword makers continue to forge them in a complex process that dates back 1,000 years and yet remains one of the most sophisticated ever devised. The origins are Chinese, but it took the Japanese to perfect a technique that solved the dilemma at the heart of all sword making: how to combine a hard, sharp cutting edge with a blade that will not break in combat. The Japanese sword maker combines hard and soft steels, which are hammered together. They are heated and folded up to 15 times, creating a layered structure in the steel. When finished, the sword can have over 30,000 layers. The steel is now stretched out and beaten gradually into its distinctive curved shape.